What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Make It Custom. I'm Carl Fisher. Today we are getting back on the Cadillac chassis, on the hydraulics. I've looked over the comments and I've seen some of your suggestions, and yes, I'm going to answer some of those questions in this video right here. Quick little look. That little car is getting a lot of questions as well. That is not a pedal car. That is larger than a pedal car. It's smaller than a golf cart, but that car was made by a very dear friend of mine who's recently passed, and that's how I got it. I'm gonna finish the project the way that he intended, and I'm gonna do a video on kind of showing you every little bit about that car, but until then, we're gonna get on the Cadillac, doing the front hydraulics, as well as adding shocks all the way around. Let's get into it. Don't forget to like, click subscribe, hit notifications. It's like Power Rangers. It's like Power Rangers. You fucking dicks. Kyle's the only one that cares. He's the only one that cares. So boys all came over for a shop night. I really didn't get much time to explain. We just were kind of hard at it. There were a lot of noises in the shop, so I apologize for not explaining the step-by-step, but that is the point of this right now, is I'm gonna show you what we did and kind of try to explain the thought process behind how we tackled the hydraulics on this front end. And I just want to big shout out to Rick and Andrew from Acrophobia X Car Club. They know their stuff. They've seen a lot of hydraulic setups. They've modified a lot of cars, and having them here, we just banged it out and got it done. I'm gonna flip the camera around and show you what we did. All right, so like the major problem with this front end, or the major thing that we were trying to work on, is to get it low enough. And in order to get it low enough, we had to cut a little bit to clearance the arms for collapse. So what I was originally talking about on previous videos was that we were gonna actually knock this arm up a little bit and then modify the top arm, which is something that people do. But the beauty of the way that we did it is that we did not have to modify the upper A-arm or the lower A-arm to get the full amount of drop that we wanted. You may have noticed we cut this kind of outrigger off the pocket and reinforced this with 1/4 inch. This frame steel is just it's just 1/8. You know, it's riveted together. It's a couple different layers. So we just made sure there was a good gap in there and welded it, you know, quite solid. So this is very, very strong. It's 1/4 inch plate welded to everything. And so we were able to cut this outer pocket off, which was interfering with our A-arm. So we got a little bit more there, but we went a little bit further and actually notched it a little bit higher to allow the A-arm to come up just that little bit more. That gave us an extra, you know, it's a 1/2 inch here, but it's probably 3/4 of an inch at the ball joint because of where the fulcrum is. You know, we're about probably, you know, 2/3 of the way between points there. So that's why I'm saying 1/2 inch there is a little bit more over here. Maybe not quite 3/4 of an inch. But we did that. We welded up the seams here. This is double layers, so we welded all that up. And the coils that are in it now, they're just tester coils. They're just mock-up coils. Those are probably not the ones that we're gonna use because I don't wanna actually cut the coils to fit until we have the body weight on the car. Because ideally, and the reason why this thing isn't against the ground right now, is that with the car's full weight down on the coil, like it's fully sprung weight, and it hits the ground. I don't want to be on the ground and then hit the hydraulics and the hydraulic compress the coil and then lift the car. I want the hydraulics to lift the car right away. So they have to be sprung. And that's why, you know, this is not accurate as to what coils we're gonna use. So yes, we got as much coil in there as possible. We might have to go, it's not a ton of coils in there. I think we got 5 wraps total, which is not bad. But like I said, I am going for a decent ride. I'm okay if the ride is a little bit stiffer than factory, but what's gonna really create our good ride is having shocks on the front and back. We're adding weight to the back, so we're putting stiffer springs back there because we are gonna have extra batteries in the trunk and hydraulic pumps in the trunk. So we are gonna address that. But as far as the front goes, we were able to remove the coil cup in the top, which actually brought the coil down a little bit further. We were able to remove that and then put a plate in, this little donut plate they sell with the hydraulics. It's just basically literally a donut. And we coped it in here. So that's what the cylinder is pushing up against, is this top plate, which is reinforced with 1/4 inch right there. And then the coil is underneath the hydraulic ram, sitting inside a coil cup, which I will show you because I have an extra one. It looks like this. So this is what the top of the coil is riding against, and this is bolted to the hydraulic cylinder. So when we push it up, it just pushes the top of the coil down. I didn't end up dropping the coil pocket in the lower A-arm because it actually already drops. It's almost flush with the bottom as it is. So you see the pigtail of the coil is almost at the flush with the bottom. So I didn't really want to go any further than that, although we could have, but you know, to add an extra inch gets you a half a wrap of coil. It's not really doing much for you. But the main takeaway from this front hydraulics, and the beautiful thing about the whole deal, is that our geometry has not changed with the install of the hydraulics. We've got the hydraulics in there, it's nice and strong, but the only thing that's changed is where the coil top mounts, and it's now adjustable. The lower A-arms are totally stock, the upper A-arms are totally stock. We've not changed anything other than clearancing the frame to allow for a further collapse. One thing I may do now is add a bump stop back into the top. Maybe that was something that Andrew suggested. But the other thing that we're gonna talk about right now is the rear. A lot of you guys asked me about the, some of you guys maybe didn't watch the whole video or listen to the whole thing, because I did kind of talk about some solutions. We were gonna put some Delrin or something around here, and there had been talks of doing a coil pocket to locate it, and that's definitely gonna happen. I'm gonna use the cups from the front. I've got the cups from the front that we took out. These guys, I'm just gonna slice them off and then weld them up underneath those as a coil locator. And then I'm gonna open up the hole in the top to like pretty much as big as this, because really, no support needs to be on the cylinder up top here. The cylinder is supported underneath. So as soon as I put this coil cup at the bottom of this plate, I can actually cut this right out and make a big hole. And I don't need plastic on the top or anything to rub against, because it doesn't matter. It's just gonna sit there and float and be located by the coil. Another thing that some people asked was, what would stop this all from falling out, going over a giant bump? Great question. And it happens to lowriders if they don't have shocks. Well, I mean, it wouldn't quite fall out. You're gonna have a fitting up here with the line and stuff, but you're right, they could drop through that hole if they really wanted to, going over train tracks, you know, at 100 miles an hour or something. But what we're gonna do is add the factory shocks in, because they actually fit. We measured them, and as far as we can tell, this shock mount to this lower mount here, I've got factory shocks for this frame, so we're gonna put those in and just make sure that they work. Now the front, we are gonna add shocks as well. Cadillacs were air ride vehicles from the factory. Sometimes you could order them with air ride. This one didn't have air ride, but I am assuming, and I'll double check online, but they probably mounted a shock from here up to the frame up here. Just one from the lower A-arm to the frame. I think that's the best place forward, as long as it clears the steering, because that upper A-arm has like a little bit of a notch, so that when the upper A-arm comes down, it'll be able to pass by the shock itself, running down this way. So I'm gonna do that. So let's get cracking. I'm gonna take care of the shocks on the front and back, and we're gonna open up this coil pocket in the rear and do the locator. Ah, that worked too good. I think the scientific term for this is hammered. Hammered. Super, super hammered. There's our notches for the A-arms. We still got a little bit clearance there. I don't think the body will actually allow it to go this low. This is probably lower than we need to go. But it's pretty amazing that it goes this low. I mean, look at that. It is not quite directly touching the ground, but it is like ridiculously close. Like, it's got about 1/8 of an inch from touching the ground. Okay, now that we are this low, I might actually raise it up just a touch because I know that it's probably about at least 1/4 inch too low, like it'll never get that far. And then we can start making our shock mounts. All right, so we got some shock mounts made up. Here they are. They turned out pretty slick. These cuts that are in here, just first off, did weld that from the backside so it is strong again. But I did that just for bending. It's just easier to bend them when they're cut. So we don't have a terrible amount of room on the backside here, but this is how that mount fits, kind of on a bit of an angle there, and it is meant to fit kind of in this little notch of the upper control arm here. The lower, that just kind of notches around. There's just a couple of rivets in this bottom plate here. I did make that out of 3/8, that tab. So there's a couple of notches for the rivets down there. I'm putting it to this brace that's riveted to the bottom of the control arm. I think it was a bump stop. So I'm gonna weld it up, weld it right to the rivets, weld it right to the bracket, kind of all the way around. That'll be nice and strong. The other beauty thing about going that tight, it's kind of the only way we can do it. I'll show you how tight this is. So this is turned full lock, and that little tiny spot where that arm is, that's all we have to work with. This does fit right in there. We do have clearance around the arm, we got clearance on the top. That's where I'm gonna put it. When you're mounting shocks like this, it is important to take note of what direction that bolt is going, because the fulcrum of this A-arm is parallel to, you know, the other one. I mean, there's a bit of give in the rubber, but if you can have this on the same angle as the A-arm, then it's not going to bind on the rubber. That's the other thing you got to think about when you're doing shocks that are going to be on an air ride or a hydraulic setup, any kind of adjustable shock where you're going to be using a lot of the travel a lot of the time. You definitely want your fulcrum, I say fulcrum, but the pivot, the bottom pivot of this shock to be on the same pivot angle as those, or as close as they can be. Like, you just don't want to mount a shock like that, you know? You want them to be like that, not like that, so that we do have the least amount of binding happening in the bushings themselves. So I'm just gonna throw these on, tack them on the bottom. I just cleaned it up a little bit with the wire wheel. We'll weld them on the top, and then we'll check travel before we fully weld them. We'll just get them all tacked in, and then we'll check, you know, to make sure everything is gonna clear nice as best as it can. Look at this thing, fully canned. We got shocks all the way around. You probably see these big blocks. I put a block at the back, block at the front, just to squish her right down, put all the tension on the springs. But we are fully slammed. Like, this thing goes plenty far enough for the body to touch the ground, and we did not have to modify these A-arms. That's the beauty of having good friends in the industry. Because, like, if it weren't for Andrew and Rick, I would have overcomplicated this. I would have, like, started customizing the crap out of the A-arms and, like, just going way too far. Those guys simplified it. They had another set of eyes on it. They had a couple more brains on it. And with their experience, helped me figure out this front suspension. I'm so stoked with it because the geometry is still 100% stock. We have stock geometry, we have stock shocks. I used stock shocks, so if Christina needs shocks, I just ordered like the ones for this car. We beefed it up, like we cut a little bit off the excess. Like, Andrew said something I thought was funny. He's like, like when we were talking about this pocket on the outside that we had to cut off. He's like, oh, they just put it there just for us to cut it off, like just for us, you know? Anyway, stoked. We are fully done with the hydraulics. We got the back done as well. We ended up hogging those holes bigger, put the spring locators in. Now the chrome cylinders are not touching anything. They won't touch anything. You know, the front has shocks on it. And let me tell you, at this point right now, with the frame squished down, we've got a 1/2 inch underneath the chassis, like parallel to the floor, both sides. I'm gonna put bump stops in to stop it perfectly, like to take the weight of the car right at this height, because it could go further down, but the shocks are mounted to be perfect at this height. So right now, if I pushed it down any further, the shocks would be taking a little bit of that stress. That's why I want to put the bump stops in it. But right now, at this perfect height, all the shocks are collapsed perfect, so that we have full travel of the shocks. The shocks limit the front end. Like, the front end could go higher than it can, but the shock travel is what limits it. But like, we're not trying to jack the front end up. This thing is for driving and slamming. So it doesn't need any more than, you know, 6.5 inches of travel or whatever we got there, 7 inches of travel. A little bit more at the wheel. I just love the setup. This is kind of a first for me, actually. Like, I put hydraulics on my hot rod and made all crazy custom suspension and stuff, and I've been around, you know, a couple other hydraulic vehicles, but I haven't done one from scratch like this, especially in an X-frame. Like, I know this is common for lowrider guys, so you're all looking at me going, what do you mean you haven't done an X-frame? But this is a lot of fun for me. I'm really stoked with the progress. A lot of things worked out better than I thought that they would. So all in all, just like winning. Next up for this chassis is gonna be going to the farm, picking up Christina's engine. Built her an engine, well, I didn't really build her, but painted her up and made her up a nice motor and tranny for Christmas a couple years ago. We're gonna stick that in next. I think that'll be the next video on here. Is next week I'm gonna get on putting the motor and transmission in. We'll measure everything off of the car directly above it. So handy to have two chassis. She was very smart in doing that. And then that way, when we drop the body on, you know, motor and trans are already in, and we can start making our floor. Thanks a lot for watching Make It Custom, everybody. Christina and I obviously are loving it, and we thank you very much for following along and supporting the channel. And I just want to throw a big shout out to Bennett's Customs in Australia. He's a good buddy of mine, and he's doing the YouTube thing, and he's doing a great job at it, and I think that some of you guys would like his stuff. He's got all kinds of projects on the go. Mainly, he's just starting the build of a single seat racer, you know, like old, like 1920s style single seat racer. So if you're into that, go check him out. He does a lot of the same stuff, like fabrication wise, but he's a painter as well, so you'll have some different content there. Don't forget to like, click subscribe, hit notifications. We'll catch you on the next one, everybody. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.